Griffin Zayne stepped from the sleek black town car onto the sunlit dock, sunglasses low on the bridge of his nose, already regretting every second he'd agreed to this river cruise. 3 days, he muttered under his breath, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored navy shirt. 3 days off the grid. What was I thinking? The hum of chatter from passengers waiting to board the SS. Reverie buzzed in the air, but none of it touched him. His assistant had booked the entire upper-deck suite to ensure privacy. No business meetings, no stock reports, no boardroom politics. Just him, a river, and a damn cruise director probably trying to make him play bingo. He walked toward the check-in table with the air of a man who owned the dock, which, technically, he could if he wanted to. That's when he saw her. She stood behind the small podium, clipboard in hand, sun catching the red-gold strands of her pulled-back hair. She wasn't trying to stand out plain white shirt, khaki slacks, and a thin gold chain around her neck, but something about her made everything else blur out. Her brows pulled together as she scanned the next guest's pass, biting her lips slightly as she concentrated. "Next," she called out, voice clear but soft. Griffin stepped forward and handed her his boarding pass without a word. She glanced at it, then up at him. "Griffin Zayne," she read slowly, her eyes flicking back up to meet his. "You're in the Reverie Suite, upper deck, lucky you." "Is it luck if you pay for it?" he quipped. She gave a short laugh. "Touché." He caught the subtle curve of her smile and the way her lashes dipped as she looked back at her clipboard. "You'll find your room at the end of the hall, private balcony, concierge service, champagne already chilled." "You memorized all that?" he asked. "I work here," she said, lifting a brow. "It's literally my job," he chuckled. "Fair enough. What's your name?" "Paloma Vance," she replied, not missing a beat. "And unless you're reporting a lost bag or a fire, you won't need it." He nodded slowly, his grin widening. "Noted." As he walked away, she called after him, "And Mr. Zayne, no smoking on the balcony and no trying to bribe the chef to sneak you extra lobster. We've had your kind on board before." "My kind," he echoed, turning around with a full smile now, rich, over it. "And assuming everyone else exists to make your vacation seamless." He paused, eyebrow raised. "You forgot charming." Paloma rolled her eyes. "That remains to be seen." He walked up the gangway, laughing under his breath. She was different, not intimidated, not impressed. She didn't even blink when she said his name. Either she didn't know who he was, or she didn't care. He wasn't sure which intrigued him more. Paloma watched him disappear up the steps, her heart thudding with a strange mix of excitement and annoyance. She'd seen all types on this boat: honeymooners, retirees, influencers, but nothing about Griffin Zayne said relaxation. He was all sharp edges, expensive watch, and unreadable eyes. The kind of man who probably had someone to shine his shoes and another to book his dentist appointments. She didn't have time for men like that. She was too busy making sure no one fell overboard or clogged the toilet with champagne corks. "Paloma, we've got a late check-in," her coworker called from behind. "On it," she replied, grabbing another clipboard and heading down to the dock. That evening, after the boat launched and the sun dipped low over the water, Griffin stood on his balcony nursing a glass of whiskey. The river shimmered gold, the current slow and lazy beneath them. But his focus wasn't on the view, it was on her. Paloma stood near the back of the deck, talking to an older couple. She laughed at something the woman said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She moved like someone who didn't care who was watching, but he couldn't stop. He'd been surrounded by models, actresses, socialites. People with agendas, chasing headlines. But Paloma didn't look at him like she wanted anything. Not even his attention, which made him want to give it to her more. He didn't realize he was staring until she looked up and caught him. Instead of looking away, she raised a brow and gave him a mock salute before turning back to her conversation. Griffin chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, Paloma Vance, game on." That night, the dining room brimmed with soft music and clinking glasses. Griffin entered in a charcoal suit, the kind that cost more than most cabins on the ship. But his eyes scanned the room for one thing. There she was by the bar, sipping water and flipping through a small notepad, probably organizing the next day's events. He walked straight toward her. "Miss Vance," he said, offering a nod like they were old acquaintances. She turned, not surprised. "Lose your way to the private dining room? I thought I'd try the commoner experience tonight," she snorted. "You'll be begging for your lobster tower in 10 minutes. He leaned against the bar. "Join me for dinner," she blinked. "I work here, you're on break, I'm always on call, I'll tip you." She gave him a flat look. "Try again." He smiled, then turned to the bartender. "Whatever she's drinking, put it on my tab." "She's drinking water," the bartender said. "Then make it sparkling." Paloma laughed despite herself. "You're impossible." "But persistent," he said, eyes locked on hers. She hesitated, then sighed. "Fine, one dinner, and if you get weird, I'm leaving." "Define weird," he said, grinning. She shook her head, but he saw the trace of a smile. They dined under soft lights, the river drifting slowly outside the windows. Griffin listened more than he talked, asking about her job, her life, how she ended up on a riverboat managing tourists. "I studied hospitality," she said between bites of grilled fish. "Thought I'd work in hotels, but I got tired of 4 walls. Now I do this. Travel, meet people, try not to lose my mind. And yet here you are having dinner with a billionaire." She looked at him then. "So you admit it," he shrugged. "I didn't say I was a good one." She tilted her head. "You say that like you've been a bad one." He didn't answer. She didn't press. Later that night, Griffin lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He had no idea how a woman in khakis and a name tag managed to make his heart race more than anything in the last 5 years. But she did. He'd boarded this cruise for peace and quiet. Instead, he met Paloma Vance, and something told him he'd never be the same. The second morning of the cruise broke with a low haze over the water, sunlight diffused through mist clinging to the riverbank. Griffin stood at the edge of the observation deck, coffee in hand, watching the shoreline glide past. He hadn't expected to sleep well, but he had. Better than he had in weeks, maybe months. He didn't question why. As the deck began to fill with early risers eager for the day's excursion, a voice behind him cut through the soft murmur of conversation. "You planning to actually leave the ship today, or just watch other people do it?" He turned. Paloma stood a few paces away, wind tugging gently at strands of her loose braid. Today she wore a navy windbreaker embroidered with the cruise line's crest and a pair of worn sneakers that looked like they'd seen every port on the itinerary. "I haven't decided," he said. "Is there something worth getting off for?" She walked up beside him, arms crossed. "We dock in a town with a vineyard built into the hillside. You can sample wine straight from the barrel. But if you'd rather stay up here and brood at the fog like you're in a noir film, be my guest." "Barrel wine, huh?" He took a sip of his coffee. "I suppose that's slightly more appealing than being mistaken for a moody detective." Paloma tilted her head. "I'd say you're more likely to pull off charming art thief, but sure." He glanced at her sideways. "You think I'm charming? I think you're dangerous with compliments." "There's a difference." "I'll take that as a yes." She didn't answer, just started walking toward the stairs. Griffin followed. They disembarked among a small group of guests, stepping onto a cobbled path that led up into a village carved against the slope. The streets were narrow, the buildings old and cheerful, with shutters painted in faded pastels and small baskets of wildflowers hanging from each windowsill. Paloma led the group through a winding alley that opened into a courtyard shaded by a large fig tree. A man with thick gray hair and a wide apron waved them inside a stone building that smelled richly of oak and crushed fruit. As the others listened to a short explanation from the vintner, Griffin leaned closer to Paloma. "You do this every week, every cruise." "Sometimes twice. And it doesn't get old." She looked up at the high beams of the ceiling, then back at him. "Some parts do, but every group is different. Every cruise is a little unpredictable." He nodded slowly. "You mean like dinner with a passenger who doesn't follow the rules?" She gave him a look. "You still owe me for that sparkling water. You didn't even drink it. You still ordered it." "Then let me pay you back," he said. "Come with me tonight, no formal dining room, just you and me." Somewhere quiet. For the first time she hesitated. Griffin, this isn't a date cruise, I've got a job to do. Then consider it a professional debriefing. You can report on how I'm adjusting. Her expression shifted, unreadable for a beat before she gave a reluctant nod. 1 hour. No more. I'll take it. That night, Griffin arranged the top deck terrace to be cleared after sunset. A pair of lanterns hung from the railing, casting soft gold over the space. At the far end, a small table had been set with polished silverware and 2 covered plates. No waiters. No distractions. When Paloma arrived, she paused at the top of the stairs, taking in the view. You realize this is technically crew space after hours. I got permission. From whom? Myself. She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. As they sat, he lifted the covers from the dishes. I convinced the chef to make something off menu. Hope you like saffron. She looked at the plate, then back at him. You really don't know how to do normal, do you? I tried that once. It didn't go well. She took a bite, letting silence settle for a moment before speaking. What happened? He leaned back in his chair, gaze on the horizon. I let someone get close, trusted them with something important. They sold it to the highest bidder. Paloma didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was quiet. Business partner? Fiancé? The word hung between them, sharp and unfinished. She set down her fork. I'm sorry. He shook his head. Don't be, I learned a lot, mostly about contracts. She gave a soft laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. What about you? He asked. Any tragic stories involving betrayal and broken engagements? No engagement, she said. But I've had my share of letting the wrong person in. He didn't steal my fortune, though, just time I can't get back. He studied her face, the slight shift in her expression. You regret it. I regret trusting someone who didn't deserve it, she said, but I don't regret learning how to spot that sooner. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. So what do you see when you look at me? She held his gaze. Someone who doesn't like being told no. Who's used to getting what he wants. Who's dangerous because he actually listens even when he pretends not to. He smiled, slow and deliberate. That's more generous than I expected. I'm not generous, she said, lifting her wine glass. Just observant. They talked until the stars came out, until the river was nothing but a dark ribbon beneath them. At one point, a gust of wind caught the edge of the tablecloth, and Griffin reached out to hold it down just as Paloma did the same. Their hands brushed. She didn't pull hers away. He looked at her, something unspoken building in the space between them, but she stood. I should go. He stood too, but didn't reach for her. Thank you for giving me an hour. She nodded, her voice quiet. Good night, Griffin. He watched her walk away, her outline fading into the dark. He didn't follow, but he knew without a doubt that he would see her again. And next time he wouldn't ask for just an hour. A soft knock tapped at Griffin's suite door just after sunrise. He opened it, expecting room service, but found a folded note sealed with the cruise line's emblem and a single word scrawled in sharp black ink. Bridge. 5 minutes later, he stepped onto the control deck, the scent of fresh coffee and river air mixing with the quiet hum of machinery. Paloma stood near the helm, her back to him, speaking with the captain in low tones. She wore a light gray sweater, her hair pulled into a low, loose twist. She wasn't expecting him to approach quietly, but she didn't flinch when his voice met the space between them. You summoned me to the command center. Should I be flattered or concerned? She turned, expression unreadable. I needed your signature. You're technically listed as our highest tier guest. For safety protocol, it gives you clearance in case of emergency. He raised a brow. Are you planning one? Not today, she said, handing him a clipboard. But the river's going to narrow after noon. We'll be passing through a lock system. It can get tight. Is this a test? Of what? My willingness to sign my life away before breakfast. She leaned against the railing. You've already been through worse, I imagine. Griffin handed back the clipboard. That's a safe bet. Paloma didn't move, just looked out over the water. The river was still, reflecting the early light like a sheet of glass. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Why did you really call me up here? He asked. She glanced at him. You're not the kind of man who settles into routine. You pace, you analyze, you calculate. I figured you'd go stir crazy another day without distraction. And you volunteered to distract me. No, she said. I volunteered to see how long you'd last before trying to take over the navigation system. Griffin smiled faintly, but the air between them shifted with something heavier. You've been watching me. You're not hard to notice. And yet you keep your distance. Paloma turned to face him fully. Because I know what happens when someone like you gets bored. You start to explore things you don't intend to keep. His jaw tightened. You think I'm playing? I think you're used to getting attention, and I'm not interested in being another story you add to your list. He stepped closer, voice low. I haven't even told you one story yet. Paloma held his gaze. That's the thing. I don't think you really want to. Griffin opened his mouth, but the captain cleared his throat behind them. We'll hit the first lock in 20 minutes, he said. Paloma nodded, brushing past Griffin and heading for the stairs that led below deck. He followed without thinking. Tell me what you do when you're not managing a floating hotel, he said. She kept walking. I read, I hike when I can, I sketch sometimes. Sketch what? People, places, moments. He stepped beside her. Have you sketched me yet? That would require you holding still, she said. I can hold still. She stopped at the landing between decks and looked at him directly. Maybe, but I don't think you know how to stay. He didn't answer, not because he couldn't, but because she was right. Later that afternoon, the vessel drifted into a narrow canal surrounded by cliffs and centuries-old stonework. The lock system began to rise, lifting the boat slowly with a soft mechanical groan. Guests gathered along the railings to watch, snapping photos and murmuring in awe. Griffin stood alone near the front, hands in his pockets, his attention not on the walls closing in but on the woman weaving between guests with a calm authority. Paloma directed a young couple away from the edge, smiled at an older woman who clutched her arm nervously, then glanced up and caught his stare. She didn't look away this time. That evening, there was no formal dinner. The cruise hosted a masquerade on the lower deck, complete with string lights, live music, and trays of champagne drifting through the crowd. Griffin arrived late, dressed in black with a silver half-mask covering the upper part of his face. As he descended the stairs, the room shifted. He hadn't announced himself, but heads turned anyway. Paloma stood near the far wall, mask pale blue with delicate filigree. She wore a fitted navy dress that stopped just above the knee, more elegant than anything he'd seen her in before. But it wasn't the dress that caught him, it was the way she looked like she belonged in a room full of strangers and yet kept herself separate from it. He crossed the floor without hesitation. Dance with me, he said, not asking. She hesitated only a moment. Then she set her glass down and placed her hand in his. They moved in slow circles to the soft swell of violins, the rest of the crowd fading into a blur of light and color. You clean up well, she said. So do you, he replied, voice close to her ear. They didn't speak again as the song shifted into something slower. Her fingers rested lightly against his shoulder, his hand firm at her waist, and for the first time since boarding, neither seemed to be leading. When the music finally ended, she stepped back first. Thank you, she said. For what? For not ruining the moment. He watched her disappear into the crowd, the glint of her mask vanishing behind a swirl of sequins and laughter. He stayed in the center of the floor, pulse steady, expression unreadable. He wasn't chasing her. But he was done pretending he didn't want to. The final night of the cruise arrived with a hush that settled over the decks like anticipation before a storm. The SS. Reverie was anchored near a quiet riverside village, its lights twinkling faintly in the distance, while the ship itself glowed golden under a canopy of stars. The evening air carried the soft rustle of leaves and the distant rhythm of a string quartet playing on the lower deck. Griffin didn't attend the farewell gathering. He stood alone on the upper deck, leaning against the rail near the bow, sleeves rolled to his forearms, his suit jacket abandoned somewhere in his suite. The river stretched endlessly ahead, but his thoughts circled only one place. Below, Paloma moved through the farewell event with practiced ease, offering final toasts, answering questions about disembarkation, and accepting hugs from guests who had come to adore her in just a few days. She laughed once, genuinely, when one elderly gentleman insisted she'd been the real highlight of the cruise. But Griffin wasn't there to hear it, and she noticed. When the crowd began to thin, she slipped away from the music and descended the narrow staff stairwell, bypassing the guest levels. She knocked once on the heavy door to Griffin's suite, then opened it without ceremony. He wasn't inside. She found him where she expected on the bow, silhouetted against a sky thick with stars. "You missed the party," she said as she approached. "I had everything I wanted right here," he replied without turning. Paloma walked to stand beside him, resting her forearms on the railing. "You've been quiet since the masquerade," he exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking." She waited. "I've been wondering what happens when this ship docks tomorrow." Paloma looked down at the water. "You disembark with the rest of the guests. You step back into your world of glass towers and private jets. I stay here and prep for the next cruise." He turned to face her. "I don't want to go back." She looked at him then, eyes sharp, voice steady. "You don't mean that." "I do." His tone gave her no space to doubt. "I've spent years building something that never really felt like mine when I'm with you. It's the only time I don't feel like I'm performing." Her jaw tightened. "Griffin, I don't want to be someone's escape. I've had enough of that. You don't get to fall in love with a version of yourself you only discover on vacation." "I'm not in love with a version of myself," he said. "I'm in love with you." The words landed between them with the weight of something irreversible. Paloma stared at him, stunned. "You don't even know me." "I know that you're brave enough to call people out when they're lying to themselves. I know that you carry too much responsibility and pretend it doesn't wear you down. I know that you believe in people more than they deserve, because you want to believe there's still good in them. And I know that you've spent your life giving everyone what they need without ever asking for anything back." Her voice cracked before she could stop it. "Why now?" "Because I almost let this end without saying it." He stepped closer. "I've spent so long building walls I forgot how to open a door. You didn't ask me to, you just walked in, and I realized I don't want a world where you're not there." Paloma turned away, blinking hard. "You have a life in New York, a company, 100 people who rely on you. I can work from anywhere. I already have a team managing most of it. I just never stepped away long enough to realize I could." She stayed silent, unsure, the river lapping softly beneath them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is an offer," she frowned. "What? Not a job, not a contract, a proposal." "A real one." Paloma stared at him as he unfolded the page. It was a sketch the kind she never shared. It was of him, drawn from the side, leaning over the railing, the lines soft but unmistakably him, her breath caught. "Where did you get that?" "You left your sketchpad in the crew lounge 2 nights ago. I only opened it because I thought it was a logbook. I saw this and I realized you see me. Not the name, not the bank account, me." He placed the sketch gently beside her hand. "I'm not asking you to give everything up. I'm asking you to let me meet you halfway, wherever that is." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and all the walls she'd built carefully, deliberately, for years began to shake. "I've never had someone choose me without asking me to change," she whispered. "Then let me be the first," Griffin said. "Because I don't want to change you, I want to be the man who deserves you." Paloma laughed softly through the tears that finally spilled. "You're infuriating," he stepped closer. "But sincere. I'm not moving to New York. I don't want you to, I'm moving to Lyon," she blinked. "What? I bought a penthouse here, overlooking the river. I signed the paperwork this morning. I'll still fly back for board meetings, but I don't want to live in skyscrapers anymore. I want to wake up somewhere quiet, somewhere human, somewhere, near you. You bought property in France this morning?" "I had my legal team wire the funds before breakfast." "It was either that or another sports team, and frankly, I hate football." Paloma covered her mouth, stunned. "I'm not asking you to say yes to forever," Griffin said. "Just to breakfast tomorrow." She stepped forward slowly, placing her hand against his chest. You really mean it? I don't say things I don't mean, Paloma. She rose up on her toes, her hand curling around the back of his neck, and then she kissed him. It was slow, unhurried, and full of everything they hadn't said: the tension, the vulnerability, the fear, but also the hope. The impossible, dazzling hope that maybe, just maybe, the river had brought them exactly where they were meant to be. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. I have breakfast duty at 7. I'll be there at 6:30. With Quasas. Don't be late. I never am. The next morning, as the ship docked and passengers gathered their belongings, Paloma stood at the railing, clipboard in hand, smile calm but lit with something new. Griffin walked down the gangway last, one hand holding a small suitcase, the other reaching for hers. She took it without hesitation. Together they stepped onto the pier not as a guest and a cruise director, but as something entirely their own. A beginning, not an ending. A promise made, not in diamonds but in choice. And that choice changed everything. The train to Lyon was quiet, slicing through the French countryside with a gentle rhythm. Paloma sat next to Griffin in a private first-class cabin, her knees tucked beneath her, a soft wool blanket draped over her lap. Outside, vineyards blurred into hills, and the sky was a patchwork of clouds and sunlight. Griffin had barely let go of her hand since they boarded. She glanced at him, his profile calm but alert as he read through something on his tablet. Not a business report she'd made him promise, but a French property law document that needed his signature. You're really doing it, she said, her voice thoughtful. He looked up. Doing what? Changing your life. He set the tablet aside. You make it sound like a leap of faith. It is. Griffin turned to face her fully. Paloma, I've made 1,000 decisions that changed people's lives, but this is the first one that actually changed mine. She leaned into his arm. I still don't understand how you found that penthouse so fast. I didn't, he said. It found me. I'd looked at it months ago purely for investment, but it felt cold, unlivable. Then I met you and I saw it differently, like it could be something real. She studied him. What if it doesn't feel like home? Then we'll find one that does. The train curved gently, casting shadows across their seats. Paloma traced a finger along the hem of the blanket thoughtfully. I want to keep working, she said. Not on a boat, not forever, but I want to build something that's mine, something that lasts. You should, he said immediately. Tell me what you need. I don't want money. I didn't offer it. I'm offering support, space, whatever makes it possible. She nodded slowly. I've always wanted to open a travel house, a place for solo travelers to stay, connect, maybe take workshops. Something small, beautiful, not corporate. Griffin's eyes lit with something new. That's incredible. I've had the idea for years, but I never had the time. Or the courage. You've always had the courage, you just didn't have someone telling you that you could. She looked at him, heart rising with something she hadn't dared name until now. You're that person I want to be. He took her hand again and kissed it, the touch light and reverent. They arrived in Lyon just after lunch. The penthouse was waiting, glass, stone, and steel perched above the city's rooftops. But inside it was warm. Not because of the furniture, which hadn't arrived yet, but because of the light pouring through the windows and the quiet way Griffin moved around it like he already belonged. Paloma stood at the center of the open space, sunlight catching her hair as she turned slowly. There's nothing here, she said. Not yet, Griffin replied. I like that. They spent the first night on a mattress in the middle of the living room, eating takeout from a paper bag and watching the sun dip below the Rhone. Griffin brought out a bottle of wine he'd bought from the vineyard they visited on the cruise, and Paloma laughed when he couldn't find a corkscrew. I thought billionaires were always prepared. I'm adjusting to civilian life, he said, holding up a screwdriver instead. Be patient. When the cork finally surrendered, they toasted with mismatched glasses from a corner shop downstairs. To new things, she said. To the best mistake I ever made, he replied. She tilted her head. Which one was that? Booking a solo cruise to avoid my life. They kissed as the city lights came on below them, the quiet hum of the streets blending with the softness of their laughter. Weeks passed. Paloma found a corner space near the river sunlit, with wooden floors and arched windows. She spent mornings sketching plans and afternoons meeting with artisans and designers. Griffin came by often, always uninvited but never unwelcome, asking questions, offering ideas, and occasionally bringing fresh croissants from the bakery 3 blocks over. He never once offered to fund it. She never once asked. They worked, they argued, they made up. They navigated each other's habits, his tendency to overplan, her resistance to anything too polished, but through it all something steady grew between them, not just attraction, not just partnership, but real, rooted love. One morning, Paloma woke to find him in the kitchen, barefoot, hair still damp from the shower, reading a guidebook on Provence while stirring eggs. "You're not cooking," she said, amused. "I'm attempting to." She patted over, stealing a piece of toast from the plate. "Why Provence?" "Because you mentioned it once. You said you'd never seen the lavender fields." "I was 12 when I said that," he shrugged. "Doesn't mean it's not still true." She leaned against the counter, smiling. "You're ridiculous. I love you," he said simply. She paused, heart catching. "I know." Griffin turned off the heat and walked over to her, placing his hands on her waist. "Then marry me," her breath caught. "What?" "No rings, no speeches, just a question." His eyes searched hers. "Marry me, Griffin. I'm not asking you to change anything. I'm not asking you to move. I'm asking you to let me be the person who wakes up next to you every morning and still wants to learn something new about you every night." She stared at him, blinking, searching for something to say that could meet the weight of that. "Yes," she whispered. "God, yes." He kissed her like it was the first time again. They married in autumn in a small garden behind the travel house just before it opened. The ceremony was simple: 20 guests, string lights, and a warm breeze. Paloma wore a pale linen dress with sleeves that fluttered when she moved. Griffin wore a navy suit with no tie and a smile that didn't leave his face the entire day. There was no press, no photographers, just joy. During the reception, she pulled him aside behind a row of olive trees. "You know, the first day I saw you," she said, "I thought you looked like trouble." "I was," he said. "Until you." She laughed and kissed him again, this time without hesitation, without fear, and without any walls left between them. They danced under the stars, barefoot and slow, the music fading into the night as the guests drifted away. And when they went home together, to the penthouse that was now filled with books and plants and mismatched furniture, they didn't need to speak. Everything they'd once protected so fiercely had already been given. From that day forward, they would build their world hand in hand, and they would never look back.